Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another incredible edition of Doc's Thoughts. Yes, Doc's Thoughts. We're going to be dropping in today on something I'm calling the coldest winter war that you could ever experience. In fact, think about it. It was late November 1915. You're deep in the mountains of North Korea near a place called the Chosin Reserve. You're told that the war would be over by Christmas. You're also told that the Chinese would not intervene. But as the sun begins to set, the temperature begins to drop to 30 below zero. Your canteen is a block of ice. Your rifle oil, it's turned to slush. And then you hear it. The sound of brass whistles, wooden flutes echoing all off of the jagged peaks, when all of a sudden thousands of white-clad figures are rushing out of the snow. Today, we're going to be looking at the Battle of Chosin Reserve. It's the story of the police action that really went a little bit wrong. It was a general's idea that fell apart in a group of men who fought through hell, just for the privilege of freezing to death on the other side of it. Well, it might have been a trap. In fact, I think the trap was there. Be careful, because this could be a trap. I always love that scene in Star Wars. It's a trap. It's a trap. It was a trap. In fact, the brilliance of the Incheon landing under the very incredible efforts of General Douglas MacArthur caused MacArthur to feel like he could do nothing wrong. In fact, he probably at that moment could do nothing wrong. The UN forces, the 15 other nations that were together, had gathered, and they began to push the Korean army out of the south and to push them north. Mao Zedong and the communist forces in China got a little bit nervous the closer they got to the Yellow River. In fact, a lot of people were saying, be careful, the Chinese might possibly come and they might attack if we get too close to the border. MacArthur wanted to go ahead and go across. He wanted to win the war at all cost. He knew that the North Koreans were being funded by the Soviet Union and also by China, and he thought we can defeat them. The communist government in China is only a year old after all. Why not go in and take care of them and take them out? What they didn't realize that 120,000 Chinese soldiers, volunteers if you will, dressed all in white, began to move across the Yellow River and the frozen tundras that were there, in the shadows of the mountains and the reconnaissance planes that the United States was flying could not pick up their movements. The Americans had no idea that they were there. Before they realized it, they were completely surrounded. As the 1st Marine Division and elements of the 7th Army began to make their way toward the Chosin Reserve, a reservoir, they were surrounded by the 120,000 Chinese soldiers, the People's Voluntary Army. And they weren't just waiting for the Americans, they were already surrounding them. As we've already said, the temperatures had plummeted to about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So the enemy that had rifles was not the real enemy on that day. It really was the weather. I mean, think about this. If you're a medic during that time and you've got a wounded soldier, you've got some problems. I mean, let's talk about the reality of what was going on. We often think of war in terms of bullets and bombs and who can outmaneuver who and who can do the right movements and motions and those things. But at Chosin, the greatest enemy really was the weather and the physics of the moment of what was going on. Imagine you're a Navy corpsman. You're a medic. You have wounded Marines that are screaming in the snow all around you. You reach for your morphine and you find out that it is frozen solid. In order to save him and use the medicine, you've got to put the vial in your mouth, let your body heat begin to thaw it just in order to inject it into that soldier. But think about it the other way too. You can't even use your bandages. You can't use your thumbs, your fingers. They're numb. They hurt to move. If you happen to touch metal with your bare skin, it'll peel the flesh right off. This wasn't just a battle. This was an experiment of human endurance. Now, the breakout happened as the withdrawal began, and the Chinese, striking the 1st Marine Division, cut them off. When they realized they were cut off, they were 78 miles from the sea, and they were surrounded by 8 Chinese divisions. Most commanders would have called for a retreat, but General Oliver P. Smith famously told the press, I'm going to quote him, retreat, hell, we're just attacking in another direction. And they did. They fought for 17 straight days in a running battle. They carried their dead with them because they refused to leave a single man behind in that frozen wasteland. There was nowhere that they could hide. There was nowhere that they could go. So a lot of times, unfortunately, they used their dead comrades as their shields as they fought in the battles, and then they would move them out so they could return them home to their families. It was an amazing thing when they got finally to the coast. One moment felt like a movie script. The Chinese, on their retreat, had blown up the bridge at Funchilin Pass. The road was out. It was a 1,500-foot collapse, and they couldn't go across that gorge. One side of the mountain, 1,500 feet straight drop, the Marines were trapped. They couldn't get out. The U.S. Air Force did something that was absolutely impossible. They parachuted in 8 massive 2-ton steel bridge sections into the gorge. The Marines began to bolt them together under heavy fire, and the bridge, which was a little bit different, was held together, and they were able to escape. While they were putting it together, Marine and Navy pilots flew danger-close missions. They dropped napalm and explosions on the Chinese positions that were sometimes just a few hundred meters away. By the time they got to the Hungnam coast and be able to get out from that port, the military was able to evacuate 100,000 troops. Now, they had lost thousands in the fighting, but they didn't come back alone. 98,000 North Korean refugees followed them to the docks. They were terrified of the incoming communist forces from China. They were terrified because they did not pick up arms and fight. They wanted out. They wanted to safety. One ship, it's called the SS Meredith Victory, was built to hold 47 people. But when it left the dock that day, it had 14,000 refugees aboard, packed in like sardines. They had no food, they had no water, they had no heat. But when they reached the South, 5 babies had been born on that ship. In the middle of the most brutal retreat in American history, life found a way. And the SS Meredith Victory goes down in history as the largest United States amphibian rescue of refugees in our history. The men who survived this battle called themselves the Chosen Few. Yep, the Chosen Few became a symbol of incredible resilience. Despite being outnumbered nearly 8-1, the Marines managed to inflict high casualties on the Chinese divisions. Many of those units were not combat effective for many, many months. You know, the Allies and the United Nations, under the direction of the United States military, didn't win that war that winter, but they did save each other. I want to thank you for joining me for the story of the coldest winter of the war. And I hope it might have piqued your interest. And I would encourage you to investigate some of the stories of the forgotten war. Go in and look up some of the issues, some of the heroism, some of the impossible feats, and some of the challenges that were faced during the Korean War. Thanks, guys, and I hope you have a great and fantastic day.